In this screencast, you will learn how to use an add-on that's called Data Director for Forms. You can use this add-on with multiple users using one form that submits information into multiple sheets. So let me show you an example of how that would work. I work at a school and we often do evaluations of children for special education and other things. So I'm going to use that as an example. Let's say that I want to create a form that my case managers can use to submit every time they get consent to evaluate a child, and then also collect a little bit of information. You can see I already have a form open, and that's going to be where we start. If you don't already have Data Director for Forms, you need to click on these three dots and scroll down to Add-ons, click on Add-ons, and then go get Data Director for Forms. So let's get started. I'm going to call my form Evaluation Consents Example. No, abbreviate evaluation there. Okay. Now, one thing we're going to want to know is we're going to want to know the child's name. Another thing we're going to want to know is the date the evaluation is due. Another thing we might want to know is the grade the child is in, and I'm going to limit my options in my example to grades 1, 2, and 3. You could put whatever grade you wanted there. Another thing that we might want to know is the case manager name. So I have made up a couple of names. Let's see, I'm going to make it multiple choice, and I'm going to call my people Simpson and Nelson. Okay. Now, more than likely, you would have a lot more case managers, and in that case, you would have a lot more options. But for this example, we're just going to add 2. Another thing we might want to know is the school that the child attends, because most districts have more than one elementary school, and I would make that one multiple choice also. I'm going to name my first one any school, and my second school, I'm just going to call it city school. Okay, well, what types of evaluations are we going to do? One thing we do is cognitive and achievement evaluations. So the first thing I'm going to put my option of both, and I'm going to put a period in my answer, and you'll see why as we go through these. Another thing, let's say we wanted cognitive only, or let's say we had already done that, we wanted achievement only. Or this could be a child that has already qualified for services. We've already done the cognitive and achievement, and perhaps we want to go to the next question, psychological. Let's say this child is already receiving services, but we think that the child could perhaps have autism. So that might be a choice. And let's spell it right. We might be questioning whether or not the child has ADHD. And notice I'm putting in a period in each one of these for a reason. And we might want to know, we might be assessing for both autism and ADHD. We might be assessing for emotional disturbance. And I would put any combination as a choice and then include a period. My last answer would be no, and I would not include a period because I don't want it to show up on my psychological sheet if we're not doing that part of the exam. So that's why there's no period. Or you could use anything. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a period. I've just chosen to use that one. The next thing we might assess would be speech. Now I want to make that one multiple choice also, and let's say we might be testing articulation. We might be testing receptive. Any areas that you might be testing, and then I'm going to put a no, and no period in that answer also. Okay, so we've got psychological, we've got speech, we have cognitive and achievement. Let's stop there. You could put a lot more questions in your form if you chose to, but we're going to stop there for this example. So what I want to do is I want a master sheet that has everything on it first. So I'm going to go to Data Director. Go to my puzzle piece. Now go to Data Director for Forms and click on it. I'm going to click Settings and Info. Now over here, Add-on State. It says off right now and we want to turn it on. And you're going to have to do that every time you create a new form and want to use Data Director. So we X out of that, go back to the puzzle piece, go back to Data Director for Forms, Settings and Info. And you have a lot of options over here. Data Splitter is the one that we're going to talk about today. You see that there's email settings, there's calendar settings. You could have a separate calendar that included only children in the process of evaluation. There are a lot of things that this add-on does. But we're going to go to Data Splitter. Okay, on Basic 1, I'm going to turn that on. This is where I want the information for my master sheet to go, and I'm going to tell it to create a new. You can choose from the drive. Seems to work a little bit better if you create a new. If you choose from the drive, it tends to just add a tab rather than the sheet. So let's create a new one, and we're going to call it Eval Consents Master Example. Okay, I want to include all of the questions on this sheet. You don't have to, but I'm going to choose this one today. And I also want a timestamp because I want to know when was this consent added to my sheet. Don't forget to click Save. Okay, now I want to go to Advanced Split. The content config and file naming we're not even going to look at today. In Basic 2, we're just going to skip that and go to Advanced Split. Gonna have to turn it on. Okay, right here, let's say I want a sheet that has only psychological. On this sheet, I want the kids that are only getting a psychological, or that do have psychological, but they may not be getting speech and so forth. So I'm going to go to my form question or other source, and I'm going to scroll down to psychological. Now right here, it says when psychological is equal to. We didn't use a number, but remember, we put a period. So that's what we want, anything that contains a period in those answers. Now, as you'll recall, when we put the no, we did not put a period. So if we answered no on a student, it will not go to this list, and that's what we want. Okay, now we're going to scroll down and have it make a spreadsheet when the settings are saved. And you see you have different options. And what do we want to call it? We want to call it Psych Consent Example. You could call it whatever you wanted to. Now, what content choices do I want? Well, let's see. I don't want everything. I want the child's name. I think I would want to know the date due. I might want to know my case manager. At any rate, you just click on the ones that you want. But most importantly, since it is a psychological sheet, we do want psychological. That's all I'm going to click on that one for today. You could click on as many as you wanted, though. Now, before I save it, though, I'm going to click Add, because I also would like to create a sheet that has the kids that are getting speech evaluations. So we want to know when speech contains, and we used a period there also, when it contains a period, we want that name to go to this list. If we answered no to speech, we don't want that name on this list. So I'm going to click Make a New Spreadsheet. I'm going to call it Speech Consent Example. And what do we want to include? We pretty much are always going to want to include the name because we want to know who we're assessing. Then you're going to click on Add, and let's do the case manager, and let's do the date due, and then of course speech. And you could add whatever categories you wanted on that. Say you wanted your speech pathologist to always know what other assessments you could go ahead and add the psychological or include all of them. It just would only pick up the ones that had speech with a period. It wouldn't pick up the ones that had no. So let's click another one. What if we wanted a sheet that had our case manager? Now this time we're going to put contains, and we want the case manager's name. Let's see, we'll put Simpson. And we're going to make a new spreadsheet. We're going to call it Simpson Example. And I'm going to put the name. And then let's add the due date. And that's all I'm going to add today. You could add whatever you wanted to. Now I'm going to click Save. But before I click Save, let me explain the sheet tab and name also. If you had different tabs in the sheet called Simpson Example, you could have it go to that tab on that sheet also. So let's click Save. Okay. Now we're going to exit out of this, and we're going to need to put in some students. We're going to need to put in some examples. So I'm going to go to the preview button and click on it, and I'm going to start putting some examples here. And I'm just going to put a first name on each one of these. Of course, if you were really doing this, you would have a first and a last. But this is just an example. And I'm going to say the date due is June 24th of this year. He's a first grader. I'm going to do this part pretty quickly, so because you know how to do this. City school, let's say he's doing both cognitive and achievement. He's going to do autism. If we're doing autism, we typically are going to do some sort of speech. I didn't put very much on speech, so I'm just going to click articulation. Okay, let's submit another response, and I'm going to call this one Dominic. And let's say that this one is due on the last day of June. He's in second grade. His case manager is Nelson. He goes to any school. We're going to do only the cognitive, and we're not going to do psychological, but we have some concern about articulation. So I'm going to click Submit. I'm going to click one more response, and I'm going to call him Edward. And let's say Edward is due July 18th. He's in the third grade. Simpson is the case manager. He goes to any school. We're going to do both cognitive and achievement. We're going to do ADHD, but we're not going to do speech on him. No concerns there. So I'm going to submit that. Click another response. I'm going to call her Felicity, and we're going to say that hers is due, let's call it August 16th. She's in second grade. Nelson is her case manager. She goes to any school. We're going to do achievement only because let's say we've already got some cognitive, but we wanted a little bit more information about her. Do emotional disturbance, and we're not going to do speech. I'm going to submit. Let's put in another response, and we're going to call this one Grace. And let's say Grace's evaluation is due July 26th. She's in first grade. Her case manager is Simpson. She goes to city school. We're going to do both. We are not going to do psychological or speech, just the cognitive and achievement. And let's submit one more. Let's call him Henry. And let's say that this one is due September 12th. He's in the third grade. Simpson is the case manager. He goes to city school. We're going to do both cognitive and achievement, and we're going to do ADHD, but we're not going to do speech. So I'm going to submit that. Okay, now let's see what happened. Let's go back to the file that I was working in, and let's see what it created. Here's my master. And it has every student that we put in there, the date due, all of the information that we asked it to include, it's here. So we know that this student is not getting the psychological, but we are concerned about articulation, for example. And let's look at my site consent example. This one should only contain those that are getting some sort of psychological evaluation, and you see that the ones that we selected no on did not show up, only the ones that had the period. And again, you don't have to use a period. You could use the word yes and then autism, and yes, ADHD, or you could use another symbol, whatever you wanted to do there. Just something to indicate it's different than no. And then let's see, Simpson. Here are the kids that Simpson has submitted so far. Here's the name and the date due. This column here with ID is going to show up on all of them. And what you can do is hide that column if it is a nuisance to you, and then you wouldn't see it. Okay, and then the last thing, speech. These are the only two that we selected anything on speech, and we selected articulation on both of them. All the other students we had checked no, so they do not show up on this list. So that is an example of how you could use Data Director for Forms to use one form to submit to multiple sheets, and you can see how it differentiated between which sheet to go to. If you had a number of case managers, you would have a number of case manager sheets. You could have a sheet that was per school, however you wanted, or date due, however you wanted to divide that up. And that does not mean that you can't go back to your main form and use a filter if you wanted to look at certain information. Say you wanted to filter out the case manager Simpson here, or Nelson, or school, however you wanted to do that. You still have all those same functions and the wrap with your, for example, if you wanted to wrap the text on that so that it is all in one, doesn't pour over into the other section. You could still color code. You can go in here to your format, and let's say we wanted to do alternating colors and choose one. You could do that. You could customize each one of your sheets the same way. That's about all there is to today's lesson. Now remember, there are other things that Data Director for Forms will do, but that's all we'll talk about today. Thank you.